Well, here's how this strange punditry thing works sometimes here in the first fifth of the 21st century. I wake up in the morning, I'm looking for stories to do, and I see on the Drudge Report a box here, and it's basically about Spike Lee at the Cannes Film Festival. And here are the little subheadlines. Spike Lee's BlacKKlansman rocks Cannes. 10 minutes standing ovation. That's always a bad sign when you get a 10-minute standing ovation at Cannes. It's not good for people that love freedom. Wanted the hate to be verbalized in quotes. Slams Trump as a two-adjective kind of a compound verb. Denounces USA, says built on genocide and slavery, and so on. Now, I thought, okay, this is going to be easy. And then I figured out that this BlacKKlansman thing's going to be another one of these kind of, do the right thing sort of things. And then I look at the trailer for BlacKKlansman, and BlacKKlansman is the story, true story apparently, of a black police officer who, in cooperation with other white police officers, infiltrates the Ku Klux Klan. And I'm watching the trailer for this movie, and I think, man, this looks fantastic. It's like a buddy film between a black and a white cop going after some evil people. Not a fan of the Klan. I'm, breaking up the Klan and their legal activities is awesome. And it looked like a really fun movie. Also, he's showing people with white power, and then he's showing this, it's set in the 70s, and then he's showing people with black power. And I thought, this looks fair, it looks cool, it looks reasonable, it looks fun. Maybe it's going to be something decent. Maybe I just jumped to conclusions. And then I read the interview with Spike, and we read some of the reviews about the movie, about this shocking final 4 minutes of what looks like a very lighthearted, fun, relaxed kind of a movie. And I'm putting two and two together from these interviews, but it appears that at the very end of this movie set in the 70s, Spike Lee goes out and refilms the black woman protester who was run over at the Nazi Klan rally in Charlotte, and basically goes on to say that, you see, racism in America is still endemic and that this whole society is built on genocide and slavery and so on. So I have a few things to say about this, and I suppose you guys do too. Steve, let's start with you.
Excellent.
The left has made unbelievable amounts. They simply will not let the Charlotte thing go, which I think is interesting, because the thing about the Nazi rally in Charlotte that strikes me so much was, here's a supposedly racist rally in America. How many people did it draw? 200? Were there 200?
Something like that,
lunatics here? Yeah, 200. And then we find out that the Charlotte mayor says to the police forces, no, we don't want you to keep these guys separate. He's looking for a fight, basically. He's looking for some kind of confrontation. But I don't think that 200 Nazis and one lunatic, driving down a street in any way compares to the carnage we see on these left-wing causes with Antifa and Black Lives Matters and all the rest of it. It seems to me to be
Chicago on a weekend.
Precisely. It's not a weekend. It's Chicago in an hour.
On a Tuesday, yeah.
Yeah. So it seemed really unfair to me and really cheap to me to be able to make this connection. Do you think that's a fair thing to say?
That is a fair thing to say, and it makes me sad that it's Spike Lee doing this. When he is not being political, he is just a really interesting filmmaker with interesting things to say. I remember when I was in high school was when his first movie, She's Got to Have It, came out, and I wanted to watch it because apparently there was a lot of sex in it, and of course I saw it on cable, and there was a lot of sex in it, but I found myself not watching it for that, even at the age of 17, but because this was a movie with really interesting things to say about men and women and our relationships and how we see each other and ourselves through each other's eyes. It was a really good movie, even to a thrill-seeking 17-year-old. And the other one that comes to mind was Inside Man, because I love a good caper flick. I love a good heist flick. And Inside Man with Clive Owen and Jodie Foster was a really interesting caper movie. It keeps you guessing the whole way. It's perfectly paced. Spike Lee drew great performances out of the actors, which you don't normally get in a caper flick. He's a good director. He's a good writer. And I hate to see him stoop to this level, Bill, because it really is cheap. We've come a long way from the systematic racism of Jim Crow to this thing in Charlotte, which was 200 idiots empowered by bad policing. This is the part that I will bet you is not in the movie. The part where
bet it's not either.
Yeah, the part where the police pulled back and let these frickin' Nazis do their thing. Just it enrages you that somebody lost their life because of bad policing, and it makes you wonder if the police department wasn't somehow purposely culpable, trying to set up a situation just like the one we saw. So it's not racism. It's bad policing. It's progressive politics trying to set people against one another in a big city police department. That's shameful. And it's even more shameful for Spike Lee to exploit it in that way. But let me tell you something, Bill. We're not going to win the culture wars until we win back the culture. It's as simple as that. When I found out that the big land battle in Return of the Jedi was supposed to be the evil empire, America, versus the Ewoks, who were the virtuous North Vietnamese, it broke my heart. That stripped something out of my childhood, something that was important to me when I was a kid. So unless we start making entertaining movies, entertaining TV shows, entertaining music, we're going to keep getting the bad end of the stick on these culture wars. So Spike Lee, talented filmmaker, we need our own talented filmmakers who can tell this great black-white buddy cop movie story without the shameful ending tacked on.
I just have to add, since you mentioned Star Wars, in the latest Star Wars movie, Rose Quinto, who is the Wesley Crusher of the Star Wars franchise, the most useless character ever created, basically looks at a casino full of rich people and said, these are the worst people in the universe.
Yeah.
This is from a group that has just killed her sister and has destroyed entire planets with its planet-crushing beam, the First Order, but these rich people are the worst people in the universe, as long as we got that straight. Scott, this kind of thing, when we talked about it on the pregame show, I said, you know what, when Spike Lee basically goes out there and says once again that America is a land that's just founded on genocide and slavery, he is refettering the chains that are keeping so many black Americans bound to this endless victimization that happened 7 generations ago, that seemed to me to be on the verge of disappearing, which is why this movie is so interesting. When you look at the actual film set in the 70s, you go back to that period of time in America, which I remember very clearly, where it seemed like we were really getting past all of this, that you could see shows like All in the Family or The Jeffersons, or you would deal with these issues and the Dean Martin roast and so on, and people seemed to be getting to the place where they were actually starting to understand and get over all of it on all sides of the issue. But then along comes progressives like Spike Lee, and I think race relations now are far, far, far worse than they were in 1972.
Well, I think that, I have friends from both sides of this. And on the one side, you've got people who would identify with Spike Lee and basically say, what do you mean, Bill Whittle? I thought we were past all of this. You people have never acknowledged what was really the problem here, and you haven't addressed the fundamental challenges that we still face. And there still is institutional racism. There's still personal racism, and you haven't done anything about that. And so, they on the one side, you'd hear those people saying that. And on the other side, there are people going, what do you want from me? Like, what's it going to take? Like, do you think I'm a racist because I'm inadequately outraged at things that happened in the past? So it seems like we're just talking past each other. And I think Steve's right. The guy's, clearly a talented filmmaker. When I saw the trailer, I immediately wanted to see the movie. I mean, it sounds like it would be a great movie. And Steve's also right that we need people who can make movies like this that carry the freight of a message that is more uplifting. But in a sense, from what I can get, at least from the trailer and from what we've heard so far about this film, Spike Lee has done that up until the final, maybe 4 minutes of the movie or something like that, where really, to me, the beautiful story here is black officers and white officers working together to bring down a Ku Klux Klan chapter. I
Love that story.
What an awesome story that is. Not to absolve the white people of the, because the white cops do something virtuous, not to make it look like the black cop is so utterly dependent upon the white cop, and so that he really can't do anything without the white cop. But this partnership of working together. If you look at the civil rights movement, you'll also find large interracial groups coming together to be able to stand up for civil rights. And that's a story that I want talented guys like Spike Lee to really put their minds and hearts into, because, not for my sake, I don't need to be absolved. I don't need to be forgiven. I've got Jesus. I don't need Spike. But I think for the sake of the people that look up to Spike Lee, I think he would be wise to be able to say, hey, here's the future that we're moving toward. This is what it looks like. This is what it means when I look at the content of a man's character, not the color of his skin. This is how that gets lived out. It's fun, it's funny, it's engaging, it's emotional, it shows love and mercy and grace and justice.
Well, he got the 10-minute standing ovation, not for the Buddy movie. He got the 10-minute standing ovation at Cannes for the last 4 minutes. I can guarantee you of that. So there's a couple things I'd like to say about this. First of all, it's a cheap shot, Spike. It's a cheap shot to do this. And when I say a cheap shot, what I mean by that is pretty simple. In the 1930s, for example, the Ku Klux Klan had millions and millions and millions of members. Democrats all, pretty much, by the way. I guess you left that part out since you want to make a political movie, but we'll just skip over that for a moment, why don't we? And to talk about the situation in Charlotte in 2017, I guess, the idea that this land is still as racist as it always was, that's a cheap shot and it's wrong. One person was killed in this, and that is a tragedy, no question about it. But if you want to talk about Nazis in America, Spike, there are people who are marching down the streets, beating up people, burning buildings, smashing things, setting fire to cars to make sure that nobody gets to hear somebody else speak on a college campus. And those people are not right-wingers like you accuse Donald Trump of being. Those people are left-wingers just like you, who are followers of your own philosophy, so you can take that and you can put that on the front of your next marquee. And for all of those European intellectuals there who stood up and gave him a 10-minute standing ovation about how racist and horrible and genocidal the Americans are, because that's what they were doing, is patting themselves on the back for their moral superiority. I wonder how many Belgians were there applauding with all of their might, while in the Belgian Congo, 50 years after American slavery was ended by the sacrifice of millions of white soldiers on both sides of this issue to get this thing resolved. In the Belgian Congo, Leopold I killed 10 million black Africans in the late 1890s and early 1900s because of his desire to have a rubber empire and all of its financial gain. I don't see any movies being told about the black massacre by the Belgians in the Belgian Congo. I wonder why that is. I wonder how many British people there were applauding with all their might at their racism of these Americans, when in point of fact, Britain ended slavery 2 decades before Americans did, after an 800-year history, and we had an 80-year history. And I wonder how many of these Brits remember what the Raj did, or what the behavior of the British were in Natal province, and the Zulu Wars, and all the rest of it. This is my point here, is simply this. This is not to excuse slavery. It's not to excuse genocide in any way. People have said to me, don't you feel guilty about slavery? I don't. I didn't have any slaves. I've never held any slaves. I don't feel guilty about it. I'm ashamed of it. I'm ashamed of it as a historical occurrence, but I don't feel guilty about it. It's not something I did. This constant, perpetual reopening of this wound with no solutions is not making things better, it's making it worse. And Spike says, well, I wanted somebody to be talking about this. Yeah, well, you sure never hear that subject in America today. Never hear the subject of slavery and black anger. It never comes up in American campuses, for God's sakes. Thanks, somebody's finally shining a light on this. So I'll just close with a personal observation here, a little personal story I heard. I got to be friends with a guy I admire very much, a comedian named Tom Dreesen. Tom Dreesen, as it turns out, was the white member of the first black-white American comedy team in America called Tim and Tom. It was Tom Dreesen and Tim Reed, who you probably remember from WKRP in Cincinnati and some other work. So let me just tell you this quick little story, because this goes to this whole progressive thing about racism. Tom was telling me that he was at a sort of a pre-script reading. He was going to do some voiceover work for this animation thing. And somehow some 24-year-old, this happened just a few weeks ago, some 24-year-old California liberal was talking about how terrible racism is and so on. And Tom said, I don't think you really understand much about the fight against racism, because Tom Dreesen and Tim Reed were out there in the 70s when Spike Lee's movie was set. And they were, in fact, a black-white buddy team. And they were joking about the stuff in order to make things better, not to make them worse. And this 28-year-old millennial producer said, oh, no, Mr. Dreesen, it's not your fault. I mean, I'm not trying to blame you. You were just raised a racist, you see. You were raised in a racist society, grew up as a racist. So your racism is not something you should really be ashamed of, because you didn't really, you're not even aware of it. You just basically drank it in with your mother's milk, that kind of thing. And Tommy got up and said, I'm leaving this meeting now, and if I don't leave this meeting, something very, very bad is going to happen here. Because of the arrogance and the audacity and the sheer ignorance, that's the word I'm looking for, the sheer ignorance of this 24-year-old douche who's going to lecture Tommy Dreesen on racism, when in point of fact, Tom Dreesen and Tim Reed were taking serious heat, including physical assaults, trying to bridge the gap between the races rather than constantly trying to split them up with a crowbar like Spike Lee continues to do. Okay? So this whole thing about, oh, you can't help it that you don't even see your racism. Please, spare me. Okay? Spare me. I want to live in a world where everybody's friends, and I'm sick and tired of watching people constantly talking about America as if it's the only land of racism and genocide in the world so that they can feel better about themselves. Let's ask the Aztecs about genocide, and let's ask the Belgians about genocide, and let's talk about slavery in the Middle East today. Let's talk about slavery all around the world today. Let's talk about the slavery of the Egyptians today. Where is it? It's never mentioned in our culture, ever. And all I don't want to justify, I don't want to cover up, I don't want to whitewash any of this. I just, for once in my life, would like a little tiny bit of perspective. Please, just a little actual perspective on what the world is really like. And Spike Lee, you should be ashamed of yourself. You had a great story there, a great story, an important story. And by tacking on these 4 minutes because you hate Donald Trump so much, you've not only cheapened your story, which is irrelevant, you've convinced yet again another group of people that everything that matters to them is deep in the past and not in their future. And it's you that are keeping black people enslaved to this idea in America, when in point of fact, if everybody had simply realized that we're the architects of our own lives and not dependent on what happened to us 150 years ago, we'd all be doing a lot better right now.
Damn right.
For everybody here at Right Angle, I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.